thank you for joining me for this, the 10th episode of Eat, Sleep, Grow, Repeat. I can't believe we're already into double figures, and when I look back at the list of guests, we've had quite an interesting variety, very predominantly with a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu connection. It was fantastic to start off with someone as high level as Dean Lister. And another amazing highlight for me was my trip with my former coach Nathan Leverton to meet Jeff Thompson at Coombe Abbey. This was amazing for me as I've long been a fan of Jeff's work. Josh Palmer's appearance with his Jiu-Jitsu Saved My Life story was inspiring, and my conversation with Hodgie Gracie black belt Nick Gabriel was one of my favourites so far. So there's not many who could follow on from that list of illustrious guests, but we managed to find someone in BJJ 5th degree black belt Steve Maxwell. At 61 years old, Steve is still teaching Jiu-Jitsu, but is now heavily focused on mobility. Luckily for us, he was over in England running a 7-hour mobility workshop, so we travelled up to Chorley and managed to grab some time with him at the end of the show. Unfortunately, the interview was cut short due to the class taking place in the sports hall, but we still managed to get an hour packed full of information for anybody who's interested in sports, health, Jiu-Jitsu, or simply ageing well. There'll be more from me at the end, as myself and Ben will discuss some of the useful information we got from the seminar. But enough from me for now. Let's go over and hang out with Steve Maxwell. Hello and welcome to Eat, Sleep, Grow, Repeat with me, Jamie Reinert, and I'm joined by my regular co-host Ben Harrison.
Hey, what's up, guys?
And today we're joined by Steve Maxwell. We're here in Chorley. We've just finished Steve's excellent seminar. How are you, Steve?
I'm feeling good, man. How about you guys? You a little tired after that?
We are, after those 7 hours of mobility, but it's been good.
Feeling pretty mobile.
Yeah, well, hopefully that will help with your BJJ.
Yeah.
And I'll show you lads even more next weekend. Hopefully you can come to Stockport, and we'll add on a little bit more on that.
Yeah,
I've learnt that I'm not mobile at all. That's what I've learned from the 7 hours. I've got a lot of things to work on.
Oh, you know, if you come away with that kind of inner knowledge, that's good in itself. Recognition is the first step to correction.
Exactly.
So first you need to recognize the limitations and then start working on them. Next time I see you, man, you'll be spry as can be, doing bear and bolo guard and.
And it's good to pick this stuff up early, isn't it? Because if I saw you again in 20 years and I hadn't been doing the stuff that you've shown us today,
might be a little bit more difficult. Never too late, but well, I can't always say that. Sometimes it's too late if you wait too long.
Yeah, no, it's excellent. Well, I wanted to start off with a lot of people know who you are, but for those that don't, how did you get into strength and conditioning, mobility, and jiu-jitsu?
I started at a very young age. I realized when I was 12 years old that I wanted to be a physical education teacher. I admired my wrestling coaches and football coaches and gym teachers the most. And I really wanted to be just like those guys. I really had some excellent mentors growing up in the public school system. In the UK, I think you have the club system, but in the United States, all extracurricular activities such as sports are all done through the school system. It's all part of the tax money that the citizens pay to the school district, and then they run all of the competitive programs with the smaller kids right up through to high school. And then when you get to university level, it's all governed by an organization called the NCAA. Right. So I wrestled 4 years NCAA, won wrestling, that's pretty high level in the United States, and I was totally in love with it. Once I graduated from college, you know, what do you do with a wrestling pedigree? I did teach physical education in the public school system and coached for a number of years, but I realized that, you know, kids are pretty tough to work with, and, you know, school teachers don't make all that much money. It's kind of tough to make a living. So I started going more and more into the adult fitness business, and I found I liked working with adults more than children. And, you know, I worked many gyms, put my time in, finally opened up my own dream gym after I had quit the teaching job and to work these gyms. Some of the stuff I was actually doing part-time even when teaching. And in 1990, I opened up Maxercise. It was the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school in the eastern seaboard of the United States, and it was the first group kettlebell gym in the United States, the very first one. I got very early in that kettlebell wave and was kind of intrigued by the whole thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of how it all started. And of course, I had many students and many people to experiment on, to try new ideas, and I was always exploring. And I was taking many workshops myself, going to different places, learning all the time, trying to add to my knowledge base. And I just put it all together in this pretty nifty program. And then there came a point where my wife and I decided to call it, we divorced. We decided to sell the business. Neither one of us really wanted to run it that much anymore. It's one of those tough deals, hard to work with your significant other and, live with them. So there's a lot of people that have found that out the hard way, just as myself. And once I sold the school, I started going out on the road. I realized that, information is worth something. People are willing to pay for good information. And I had spent my whole life, working in other people's gyms and my own gym and teaching physical education, competing in sports, getting involved with the Gracie brothers. That happened in 1989.
Right.
And just fell in love with that game. And so, I was actually pleasantly surprised to realize that, hey, I had my first seminar on my own with Mike Mahler. The boys are back in Las Vegas.
Right.
Prior to that, I had done some RKC things, So that was kind of my start. But the real true strength and conditioning started in 1970 at a gym called Huff and Puff Gym. It was a high-intensity training gym. Mostly that was, at the height of the whole Nautilus high-intensity training movement, Arthur Jones. I was intrigued with that whole idea, and it just kept developing from there. So I've been in this business for 43 years as a professional. And you pick up a lot of good ideas and a lot of information. Now I'm full-time on the road.
Yeah.
Try to share it, teach it, and so forth.
When did you make that transition to being full-time on the road?
That was 2005. I divorced I separated in 2004, moved out of the house. I actually moved in a camper van. Always wanted to do it. It's like a big kid, like a second childhood. And I just drove around in my really kick-ass camper van. I actually drove 8 times across the United States.
Wow.
And then I had my own jiu-jitsu school for many years. And I would stop at other people's jiu-jitsu schools, and sometimes I'd teach for a while. I had a chance to teach at Megaton School in Phoenix. Megaton is a Hickson Gracie black belt, fantastic guy. Gave me a chance to do a little teaching and training there. Various places in California. I was at Saulo Ibero's school. Saulo and Shanji had the University of Jiu-Jitsu. And I had a great time there. And I was doing some coaching and teaching with those guys. And I had trained those guys even at my school earlier for fitness when they were preparing for the Abu Dhabi World Submission Wrestling Championships. Had a chance to work for these guys. And I was able to, because I did have so many students and was a full-time professional, I was able to do a lot of experimentation to find out what works, what doesn't work. Of course, I'd always tested it myself first. What I was looking for was a way to injury-proof my joints. What I realized is there is no way to injury-proof, but you can certainly cut down on injuries. And a lot of that was some of the mobility conditioning that I showed you guys today in this seminar.
Yeah.
I realized that, wow, being flexible isn't enough. Being strong or in good cardio shape is not enough. You need something more. What is that elusive ingredient that seemed to be eluding me in my early days of jiu-jitsu? I coined it, I just called it mobility conditioning. The ability to be strong in every position, in kind of weird angular positions and so forth. And also getting rid of a lot of the immobilities in your body. What are those immobilities? What isn't firing properly? What part of my body am I not using on a regular basis? Why am I imbalanced and in pain? Well, I was able to discover these things and ferret these things out. And when you correct them, you can see the result. You see how good you feel right now.
Yeah.
You don't feel beat up at all, do you?
No, not at all.
Your body feels quite excellent, maybe even energized a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the way it should make you feel. Rather than feel like you just got beaten with a baseball bat and dragging yourself out of the room, you should feel kind of good. You should feel better after the training than before the training. And that's the whole idea of a lot of these mobility drills that I did with you today.
Yeah.
But it was a long time in putting it all together. I tried a lot of different systems,
Yeah.
And of course I tried everything under the sun at some point or other, as an experimenter, as someone that wanted to see for himself firsthand. But this is the culmination of many, many years of experimentation with many different systems. And I've taken bits and pieces from each one and put it together in what you saw today. And this was only a very small part of the entire system. I wasn't able to do much. We only had 6 hours.
Yeah.
It would have taken me a week to do everything. But I tried to give you bits and pieces that I thought would be most applicable to you guys.
No, it's really interesting. I was going to ask you, with all the experimentation you've done, you'd probably be the perfect person to ask. When you're starting out with jiu-jitsu, it's so difficult because there's so much to learn. You've got obviously the gi, no-gi, but then you've got all of the cardio that you need to do. People are talking about doing yoga, stair runs, weight training. How would you, for somebody who started out, how should they prioritise their time?
They should quit everything except jiu-jitsu. Right. And they should do only gi jiu-jitsu. Forget the no-gi. Okay? Right. If you just go no-gi, you'll just always be relying pretty much on power and strength. To really learn jiu-jitsu, you need to learn the technical jiu-jitsu game. And because the gi is slower game, it slows it down, and you're able to see the pieces and the movements a little bit more effectively. And you can't just power through stuff when you're wearing the gi. So you learn to be more subtle, more soft, more relaxed. The jiu-jitsu will be strenuous enough for the average guy because most beginners burn out and get really tired, get overtrained. So just quit the weight training. The cardio is very specific. You can run your head off and it's not going to do one bit of good out there on the mat. It's a very specific type of endurance. And a lot of it isn't even cardio per se. A lot of it is just learning to relax and learning to breathe properly. So a person that gets tired in the jiu-jitsu mat, it's because he's using too much power, too much strength, he's too tense, he's not relaxing enough, he doesn't know how to breathe. And that's why his heart rate is up. But if he learns to do all these things and learns to relax, he becomes more efficient, he learns to conserve his energy, he's not expending as much energy and so forth. Once jiu-jitsu begins to be a flow like that, then you can start adding back in weight training and some of these other things. Yeah. But in my opinion, you never need to run for jiu-jitsu. It's completely a separate activity altogether. Right. It doesn't really positively influence jiu-jitsu at all.
Even the sort of hill sprints, those sort of things
you
like
get good at running hills.
Yeah. Right, okay. So the mobility...
But I'll tell you, there are drills in jiu-jitsu which are incredibly tense that simulate, you want to as closely simulate the conditions of a competition as you can, if that's what you're training for.
Yeah.
So have you ever heard of the first points drill?
No. I
line up the first 4 guys, it might be like another 15 guys on the wall. You bring a person out and you try to see who can get the first points on the board, whether it be a takedown. If you pull guard, you have 1 minute to sweep.
Yeah, right, okay.
And the loser goes back in line. Winner stays in. You get through 2 or 3 rounds of that, you think you're going to cough up a lung, man. That is the most beneficial drill you could ever do. First points. It's something Sully Barrow used to do in Hoyler Gracie. Brutal, man. Brutal. Believe me. You won't think about hill sprints or anything. But say you'll be training your body exactly the way you would for a competition.
Yeah.
The running and the hill sprints and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't have as much trade-off, carryover value as what you think because it's so specific. The movements are so demanding. Now, one movement I have found, which is really excellent, a whole body movement, is Spider-Man crawls. Forward, backwards, sideways. They're using your whole body. Yeah. Upper body, lower body. Because in jiu-jitsu, you're never just running on your feet and standing up. But you are crawling around a lot. So I have a lot of various drills that are very sports-specific, geared towards Brazilian jiu-jitsu. They mostly involve whole body movements like Spider-Man crawls. So you can do it solo on your own if you don't have a partner. But yeah, the running and all that stuff, I used to do that, but I just realized, wow, what a waste of time, man. It just makes me tired for no good reason. Because I go back in the mat, I'd still be tired, I'd still be gassed.
Yeah.
You know, I hurt my shoulder one time. Another time I hurt my rib. So I had an extended period of quite a few weeks where I wasn't able to get on the mat. And I was doing all that crazy stuff. You know, I could still do my running and hill sprints and intervals and all that. And I get back in the bike and I'd still be dying like a rat. So...
But the mobility, you think that should be...
Mobility is from day one that you cannot beat mobility.
Yeah.
Mobility is really, really important. I mean, that's also the key to aging well. People are losing the ability to move because they don't move. They don't move because they sit. They sit because it's just a habit. It's a bad habit. It's like overeating. It's a bad habit. Yeah. Eating junk food is a habit. We get into all these habits, and it's hard to break a habit once you start. Just ask anyone that's ever tried to stop smoking. Brutally hard habit to stop. It can be done, but you have to really, really be disciplined to do it. So sitting is another habit. I like to call sitting the new smoking, because it's just as harmful to your body. It really makes you immobile. Your brain, and it's so efficient that it gets rid of any movement pattern that you don't use. So if your predominant movement pattern all day is pretty much sitting in a chair, you forget how to do everything else. Look at the average person. For your listeners out there, think of your grandma or your grandfather, right? Think about the way they move. Imagine your grandma getting up and down off the floor. Now imagine her trying to get up and down off the floor quickly. She couldn't do it. Not if she's anything like my mother. It would be impossible. Why? What happened to that grandparent or that person? They used to be young once. They forgot how to move because they didn't move. They sat on the chair with the TV clicker, or, people sit in the office, the IT guy behind the computer all day. Your body gets stiffer and stiffer because it doesn't move. It doesn't have to move. Therefore, it gets rid of any brain, motor pattern, the brain to muscle connection. Gets rid of those patterns so that it becomes hard to move.
Yeah.
It becomes a real effort.
I found it quite interesting when you were talking about the safe ways to sit, which is basically based on how children sit naturally. And how many of those positions is there? About 7, 8?
There was 10 archetypal human postures, yeah.
I find probably about 7 of them pretty difficult. So that just shows you.
Hey, me too.
Yeah.
I sat around a lot too.
Yeah.
And, I still make my living doing online personal training. People for diet programs, conditioning programs. Sometimes they're athletes, a lot of just regular office workers, some just normal people want to lose body fat and regain their health. So I do that stuff online. But that entails me sitting, typing out programs. I find myself sitting just like this a lot during the day. So when I do phone calls and things, I try to stand up and pace and walk around while I'm talking to people on the phone. I've been getting down on the floor quite a bit, sitting on my ankles, sitting cross-legged, lying on my stomach, just like a kid would do, playing video games and so forth. And that keeps your body supple. So it doesn't become so difficult to sit in these various positions. But people basically end up in life, in modern society, shaped like a chair. If you think about it, they're all hunched over and forward, their legs are all bent, they're stooped. It's almost like their body took a chair-like shape towards those latter years. I don't want that to happen to me.
How would you approach coaching an endurance athlete or a runner? Would there still be the emphasis on mobility and things? Or?
Not as much, because a runner doesn't have to be particularly mobile to do his sport. Remember, there's a big difference between an athlete and a person just looking for general health and well-being. No one ever said the sports is healthy. No one ever said competition is healthy. If anything, it probably shaves a few years off the end of your life. Now, that's no reason not to do it. Living a long life, having never accomplished or done anything, that doesn't mean much either, So, like the average life expectancy of an NFL football player in the United States, they're the biggest, baddest dudes. They're probably America's best athletes. And they only lived about 64 years old because of the tremendous impact and stresses on their body from playing that game. But if you were to ask the average guy, hey, was it worth it? Having a short life, but a glorious career, they'd say, hell yeah, it was fantastic. The roar of the crowd, the adrenaline, playing at the ultra elite level, the adoration, being on national TV in front of millions of people, the women, the parties, the money, I mean, all those things made for a glorious career. How could you ever replace that? Someone that had never experienced that, they couldn't even begin to imagine what it must be like on Sunday to be out there in front of millions of fans, or Super Bowl Sunday. I'm sure soccer players go through the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
Here they adore the soccer guy, the football football. Yeah. And I mean, those guys, they don't have particularly long lives, and they get pretty banged up too. Even though it's supposedly a non-contact sport, plenty of contact out there, man. And those guys would say, sure, it was well worth it. Yeah, I may be hobbled up, crippled up a little bit, and I'm in a lot of pain. But dude, I wouldn't have traded those days for anything. So you have to ask yourself, what is the risk to benefit ratio? What am I getting out of it versus what am I giving? Am I willing to pay the price and make the sacrifices to do it? And if distance running floats your boat, man, you should go for it. Don't let anyone tell you different, you know?
And would you keep all of the strength training in for a distance runner?
For sure, I would strength train a distance runner, but I'd only do it like twice a week. You don't need to do a lot of strength training. And this lightweight, high rep crap, no. You need to work your muscles hard, just like any other athlete. Because the stronger the general strength that you can build in your body, the more efficient you're going to be across the board in every activity that you do.
I know, I thought it was really interesting in the seminar we just came from where you were talking about hypoxic training and breath control and how I think it was a Ukrainian runner you were referencing.
It was a Czechoslovakian guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
the hell was his name?
I don't remember his name. All I remember is that he did 50 reps of 400-meter sprints.
Yeah, I know, that's insane, isn't it, man? It was the guy that won the Melbourne Olympics in the 5,000, 10,000, and the Olympic marathon. He won the gold medal in all three events. No one's ever done it before or since. And Emil Zapotek.
Oh, you got it.
Yeah, your listeners should look that guy up. That guy was a phenomenal endurance runner. And he did a lot of the hypoxic training and sprint training and so forth.
Do you have any materials out on that where someone who is running or pursuing endurance sports can go and have a look at that, or could you recommend?
I learned this stuff in Russia at the summit of the Breath Masters. It was like a couple Russian physicians and the Russian Sistema community that was there. A lot of Russian military types, probably some spies and stuff, God knows. But it was really cool. They're really into this breathing martial arts style. It's becoming very popular across the UK and America and on Europe. They had some very interesting breathing exercises and so forth, and that's where I learned this stuff. But there was nothing that I knew of that I could read in English. Most of the stuff was in Russian. They had a bunch of books in Russian. No translation.
I found that breathing very interesting because I've never thought about that at all. And obviously, when you were talking about it, obviously it's going to be vital for jiu-jitsu. So if you're being pinned, you're taking the air out of your lungs. You've got to know how to breathe, haven't you?
There's a movement called a diaphragm crush where you can actually angle your body over a guy's diaphragm and squeeze it in such a way that it makes it really hard for him to breathe, and you can put him into a panic. Usually, upper belts will have to do it to like white belts and blue belts, because you can actually tap a guy.
Yeah,
with
Dean
it.
Lister did it to me.
Yeah.
Shanji
Bear did it to me too, and I was a black belt, and he still did it to me. Solo's done it to me as well, man. So yeah, these guys, they know exactly how to lay on you and just press you to the point where you just want to scream and you just want to give up. But if you know how to breathe, you can overcome it. And it's all part of that breath control. And of course, Master Rickson Gracie now is back in the seminar circuit. He's just started his own jiu-jitsu federation. He's kind of fed up with this crazy point system and people holding the fight. They'll get like one or two vantage points and then they just hold and stall. And it's really ugly for jiu-jitsu. I was never a fan of the 50-50 guard. I mean, I think people should know it, because if you don't know it, you're going to get your leg, torn up. So you should at least study these things, but I don't think they belong in modern competition. I don't. I think people should have a chance maybe to work the technique, but if they're just stalling and holding it, I think they need to do something to break it off and restart. It's killing it for the fans. But Rickson's idea of giving points for submissions, for submission attempts, is pretty cool. And I like the idea of doing rounds. Let's say you get caught in round one and you actually get tapped out, but you still have a chance in the second round. So it's kind of a cool idea. Yeah, let's just see if that was, if the guy can sustain that. I don't believe in luck, but, maybe you just made a really dumb mistake and got caught. Well, let's see if the guy can do it again. Or if you catch him, well, now it's a real interesting, you trade catches. Okay, who's the better guy? Because what is the reason for a competition? What is the reason for it? To compare jiu-jitsu styles, to see where you're at, and also to see which man's jiu-jitsu is the best, at least on that given day. Yeah. It could vary from day to day, believe me. I've had guys where I could beat them on Monday, and then they'd whoop my ass on Wednesday, and then it'd be a tie on Thursday, and then maybe I'd beat them again on Saturday, and then the next week it'd be reversed. So there's that. So it's a comparison of skill versus skill, technique versus technique. Obviously, conditioning is a big important part, because we know in any competition, mano a mano, that the stronger athlete will always win if all other things are equal. Meaning that even in a foot race, you both have the most beautiful stride and you're most fluid, and you both have really good turnover technique, and you have good race strategy and all those things. The guy that's a little bit more muscularly stronger is actually even going to win an endurance competition. You know? Yeah. All things being equal, including the mental capacity, your mental ability to push yourself and concentrate. And it's certainly true in a combat sport, where, you know, all things being equal, that's where the strength comes in. But you shouldn't be relying on strength all the time, especially as a beginner. And that's why I said earlier, the beginner should just quit all that strength training and all that stuff. And if he's big and stiff from improper strength training, he probably should be doing something like yoga, just to learn to relax and loosen his body up, or some of these mobility drills that I showed you guys.
Yeah, definitely.
A lot of guys wouldn't have access to this mobility I was just talking about, but almost every town has a yoga class somewhere. Let the guy get in there, do a little yoga, just to learn to loosen up a little bit, and just stop with all the conditioning and the running and the jumping and the weightlifting and the kettlebells. Just concentrate on jiu-jitsu.
I think that's what I'm going to do, is concentrate on the mobility, some yoga and the jiu-jitsu and the breathing as well. I thought it was interesting where you were doing a breathing test at the beginning, and you were saying if you were scoring, if you weren't scoring high enough, then you shouldn't even be training yet, you should be working on that. I've never heard anyone say that before.
Was there a name for that test, Steve? Where
Buteyko, Buyteko. I believe I'm pronouncing it Buteyko.
Excellent.
Control pause. But there's been a bunch of guys that have written about that. But I had a client. He's a mathematician from Dusseldorf, Germany, who had horrible asthma, and he was cured with that breath technique from the Buteyko technique. It was they used to use it as a cure for people with breathing difficulties, but it can heal many, many, many different imbalances in the body. Figure this way: if you're not getting the most important nutrient of all, oxygen, because your breathing is impaired, well, then you are suffering on every level, cellular-wise and everything else. There's just no possible way that you can be healthy if you're not breathing properly. There's just no way. And as we showed in the seminar, we identified the 3 different breathing types. Most people are in what we call a panic breath state. They're panic breathing all the time, 24/7. And they're just under stress, and they can't understand why, I'm so tired. You know, they call it the yuppie flu, or, you know, they call it adrenal burnout. There's a lot of it is just purely not knowing how to breathe. They breathe, they burn their adrenaline glands out because they're in a chronic state of stress, because they're breathing like a person that is in stress, panic breathing. So once you learn how to bring the breath down and slow the breath and breathe in a really reasonable fashion, you'll find yourself with more energy, you'll be more relaxed, you don't get as angry, you don't get sick as often, and you'll find that even your sports like jiu-jitsu will be really calm. Master Hickson, Euler, you know, Hoyce, all those guys knew how to breathe. Yeah. You know, back in the day, they didn't really emphasize it to us beginner guys too much. I don't know whether they didn't think it was important or whether it was a little family secret. I don't know, but Hickson's definitely teaching it now. Teaches like the first good hour of a seminar, he's teaching the breath technique, and I'm teaching the same thing now. I just found it revolutionary. How, you know, I just was amazed that I was a professional in the field of physical education and fitness and never had been taught breath control. People just kind of glance over it. Inhale with a rep and exhale, you know, as you lower the weight or something along those lines, you know. Or they'll just say breathe, but they don't really tell you how, and they don't pay attention to how you're breathing. And then people with harmful, dysfunctional breathing styles, like the Valsalva sink we talked about, where people will involuntarily hold their breath and make grunts and groans. It sounds something like, huh, huh, Very harmful. It can actually cause premature death, heart attack, high blood pressure, stroke, an aneurysm. I mean, not a good thing to do.
Some of the jiu-jitsu that you learned back in the day seems a lot different, because I saw your seminar that you're teaching next week. There's things like defending against punches, baseball bats, there's all sorts of things that I've trained at a couple of jiu-jitsu schools and I've never seen anything like that on the curriculum.
Well, people have to understand that jiu-jitsu was invented as a self-defense technique, a preservation.
Best not to touch that.
Sorry, I had my hands in the microphone.
Sometimes it makes a noise when you do that.
I tend to fidget when I sit. I start putting my hands and stuff and doodling around. Sorry about that.
That's all right.
That's pretty funny. Yeah, so anyway, that was the original intention. Survival. Help the little guy survive against the bigger, stronger guy. I don't know of any other martial arts that would let a smaller, weaker man actually survive. A lot of people think that self-defense is kicking someone's ass or beating somebody up like in Hollywood. No. It might just be walking away without dying or beaten and put into a hospital or something. You can do that with jiu-jitsu. You can't always do something to a bigger, faster, stronger, heavy guy. I mean, what are you going to do with some guy that plays professional rugby or something and the guy's just like a monster? I mean, come on. And you weigh maybe like 70 kilos and he weighs like, 95 kilos or 100 kilos. You don't have a chance against that guy, not as far as beating him up, but jiu-jitsu would give you a chance to survive against him. He couldn't hurt you enough to kill you. It'd be hard. Yeah. Once you get to a certain level. That's jiu-jitsu, man. It's the only martial art I know. You certainly couldn't do that kickboxing or punching or Muay Thai or karate or Kung Fu. You're going to get pounded to a pulp.
Yeah.
Just to go show you how inefficient some of the striking styles are. Remember K1, that professional kickboxing tournament?
Yeah, it's good.
Do you remember the American football player Bob Sapp?
Yes.
Bob Sapp never did kickboxing in his life. He walked in and knocked out all the best kickboxers in the world. Knocked them out.
Ernesto Hoost, I think.
He actually, that was the first tournament. He caught up with him eventually. But he knocked everybody out without even knowing kickboxing. He listed his martial art as NFL. He was just this big, giant, monster, strong guy. What are you going to do out on the street with a guy like that?
Yeah.
Right? Jiu-jitsu, you would have a chance. You could survive against Bob Sapp. You
still
literally
would
could.
a few people, though, wouldn't you?
It's always best to speaking of running, your best self-defense, of course, is sprinting as fast the other direction from the guy. In lieu of that, and you really do have to come to some type of physical confrontation, the jiu-jitsu gives you the technique to cover up and minimize the damage. It's not to say you're still not going to have a black eye or, some shots on your ribs and your face, but at least you can keep the guy from putting you in the hospital or killing you.
Well, I think with these techniques you don't necessarily learn these days, there's these old techniques with defending against punches, things like that. Nowadays a lot of people, it's just sport, jiu-jitsu that's taught, isn't it? And then
pretty much, it's just become a sport, and it's fun. It's definitely fun.
Yeah.
And I don't have anything against the sport per se. I don't like the direction it's going. Let's put it that way. But I definitely think that anyone that has an advanced belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu should know the self-defense. And in the Gracie system, one of the things that differentiates them from the others is they absolutely insist that in order to get the black belt, you have to know all of the self-defense techniques.
Yep.
I know Helson Gracie made me learn 155 techniques, and I had to demonstrate them in front of him before I got my belt. And that was pretty tough. And he alternated 3 attackers on me.
Yeah.
One was a Navy diver, really tough guy, and they were really attacking me. They were making it real. It wasn't like just holding their hand up there and then waiting for me to react. I had to stand in the middle of the room with my eyes shut, hands at my side. They would come up, and then they would just do the attack, and I had to respond. So there was a lot of techniques to remember.
Did you never think back in them days that you might do a bit of, because they did a lot of challenge matches, didn't they, like the early MMA style things? Did you never get tempted to do that yourself?
Well, see, I started in 1989, my first seminar, when no one even knew what Gracie Jiu-Jitsu was or where it came from or anything about it at all. People would look at me like I was crazy. I'd say, oh yeah, I'm checking out this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. They said, Brazilian? I thought it was Japanese. And I said, no, Brazilian. They'd be like, wow, what is this? They would think it was like capoeira, the kind of Afro dance type thing. And it was, no, this is jiu-jitsu. Came from Japan, but they changed it around. And in those days, they were animate about the self-defense. Everybody learned self-defense. The Gracies were knowing how to protect yourself in the streets was number one. Then you started playing the sport aspect of it after that. Yep. So that was really, really interesting. So when I first started, Horian had written an article in Playboy magazine called the $100,000 Challenge. It says, hey man, we have so much confidence in our martial art, we're willing to put $100,000 down and bet that we could beat any other martial arts style in the world. And people said, oh my God, how can you say that? Oh, that's so rude. These guys are so cocky. They're so arrogant. They're so un-Buddha-like. Forgetting that in ancient Japan, they used to have swordsmen go into other fencing schools and want to duel to the death. Check out the Book of Five Rings and read about Musashi. Yeah. Some of the sword fight duels to the death. And then a lot of the old karate and jiu-jitsu schools would literally invade another school and try to beat all the students up. This was very common in China as well, in the old martial arts schools. They were always warring against each other and trying to see whose technique was best, or always testing their technique. So the Gracies were just putting their money where their mouth was, and that's how much confidence they had. And no one ever took their money. What would happen, people would show up at the school and didn't want to bring any money. They just wanted to try it on. And so they entertained a few guys just to demonstrate to the students, the technique. They would never back down. But the guys weren't bringing the money. They had nothing to lose. So they kind of got sick of that after a while. It gets kind of boring, guys coming in every week wanting to fight. So they started having us students do it. So I had my share of those challenge matches, and it was pretty scary. But it's not like you're going to say, oh, well, I don't want to do it, or, it's kind of, you had to get in there and do it, And it really built confidence in the martial arts style. Believe me, I was scared out of my mind the first couple that I tried. And in my school in Philadelphia, I used to have guys come in my school too. And we would very politely explain, hey, look, man, we're just students. I'm a purple belt at the time. I'm just a purple belt. I had my first one. I said, you want Hoyts, man. I'm just learning from him. Yeah. But then they would insist, and we'd say, okay, we get the video camera out, we put it up. The video camera was important because they couldn't go back and say, talk trash or say it didn't happen or say we did something we didn't do or whatever. The video camera was there as the silent witness. And after a while, I started getting my students doing it too because it got tiresome. We had a lot of guys, man. That first year between 90 and 90, even after 93, the first UFC was 93. It just got kind of crazy. People were coming in all the time. So, we just kind of did a rotation. Which senior student was going to do the next challenge fight.
Did you ever have anyone give you any trouble?
Oh yeah. We had a couple of tough wrestlers. Wrestlers were always a nightmare. Those guys are tough to deal with. We had this one judo guy that was brutal. Man, this guy was good. But we always prevailed. We'd always catch the guy. We'd always tap him. Yeah. Most of the kickboxers and stuff were pretty easy. They didn't know what to do on the ground. All you had to do was clinch those guys up, boom, down to the ground. They'd panic, they'd freak out, and they'd almost always give it up. But guys that were somewhat used to wrestling or judo, they were a lot tougher guys. The jiu-jitsu would prevail, but it wasn't easy. I can remember a couple matches going on as long as 40 minutes or so, yeah. Wow. At my school. And, Elliot Gracie actually had a fight that lasted well over 3 hours. So.
Who was that with, a judo guy or something?
It was actually with a former student.
Oh, right.
Yeah, a guy that he had actually taught. It was in the ring. The guy challenged him to a fight when Elliot was actually sick. This guy was in his 20s. Elliot was in his late 40s. Yeah. So, the guy outweighed him by probably about 30 kilos, 40 kilos. And it was supposedly a tie. They had to pull the guys apart. But then Carson Gracie, like a couple weeks later, almost beat the guy to death in the same fight, just to make a point. How dare you challenge an old man who's sick? So fight me. I'm healthy. I'm feeling good. But that was the way it was. It was like the Wild West. But the whole concept of the Gracie Challenge came from a much earlier time, Isai Maeda, who actually visited here in the UK. Maeda was a representative of the Kodokan Judo School. Jigoro Kano, the man that founded judo, just basically gathered a lot of diverse jiu-jitsu schools together to see if they could come up with one style. He was trying to bring everyone together. He was an educator, a brilliant guy, a real genius in his own right as far as an educator and organizer. And Maeda was one of his guys. And then he sent representatives from the Kodokan all over the world to spread the news and spread the word. And that's one reason why Europe is so good in judo to this day, because of those early emissaries from the Kodokan. They went to France, Spain. Apparently they must have gone to Russia at some point because they're quite good there. Definitely here in the UK, you're well known for your judo. And then so Maeda actually started doing professional fights. He did it just to make money. And he started taking on no-hold-barred fights just to make the money. And it was all part of a stage show. And, of course, Kano thought this was terrible, un-Buddha-like, you're accepting money, I don't think it's, So that was kind of un-Japanese at that time. So he threw him out of the Kodokan. But, Eisai Maeda was undaunted. He actually met Theodore Roosevelt. One of his cohorts was embarrassed by a Navy wrestler in front of Theodore Roosevelt, who was an avid judo player. He was really into jiu-jitsu and judo. It used to be taught in Annapolis at the Naval Academy. It used to be taught to the Army Air Corps back in the early days. So a lot of the old World War II guys got the old school jiu-jitsu. And then Maeda thrashed the guy that embarrassed his friend. He got some Japanese business guys to put up some money, and they put together this little competition, and they kicked the guy's butt and took all the money. And that was the start of that whole UFC challenge match thing. And then he ended up going to Cuba and Mexico and fighting as a professional, making his money this way. He went through all the mining camps in Central America and down into Brazil, a lot of mining camps and so forth. And he would fight in these camps against these guys. They had plenty of money, nothing to do. They'd love to go watch a good fight. And Maeda's jiu-jitsu was just unbelievable. Eventually, he settled in Brazil, where the Gracie family helped him establish an immigration colony. At that time, Japan was fueling its pre-World War II economy, and it needed natural resources from places like Brazil. It's only an island nation, so they're still that way. They're still bringing stuff in, Yeah. And he was so grateful to the Gracie family for helping him get established that he asked, "What can I do for you?" And the elder Gracie, Gaston Gracie, Scottish native, said, "Hey man, why don't you teach my sons jiu-jitsu?" And Maeda says, "Okay, I will, but I want them to promise not to show my techniques to anyone." So he did, and they became quite adept. The oldest was Carlos Gracie, and he was the founder of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and fantastic practitioner on his own right. And Elio Gracie, his younger brother, who was sickly, and they actually took him out of school because he had fainting spells. He wasn't a well kid, very skinny, bad temper, used to get in fights all the time, even though he didn't know how to fight. Got his butt kicked a lot. He would sit there at the mat watching Carlos teach. Carlos only agreed to teach after Maeda died, by the way. It's important to know that. He figured that his promise not to show the secrets was broken at the point of Maeda's death. Right. And his family had fell into bad times. They really needed to make some money. Apparently the elder Gracie had a tendency to gamble, and he lost the family fortune, and so they fell in hard times, and they just had to make some money. And that was the first Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school. One day, after many years of sitting along the mat, Carlos was late for a VIP client. It was the president of the Bank of Brazil. And he wasn't able to make his appointment. And, of course, this VIP guy was a real stressed guy, and he's an executive, and he's looking at his watch and saying, "Oh, my God, he's late. I'm going to miss my appointment." So Elio says, "Hey, sir, I could give you a lesson." And he looks at the kid and says, "I had no idea you could teach." So they change into the kimonos. They go out. He gives them a magnificent lesson. So Carlos shows up, about 20, 30 minutes late and says, "Oh, man, I'm so sorry I'm late. I really humbly apologize." And the president of the Bank of Brazil says, "Hey, your kid brother is fantastic." He says, "If you don't mind, Carlos, I'd like Elio to be my teacher from now on." And Carlos was like, "Whoa, I didn't even know he knew it." He didn't say anything, but he's like looking like, "What? When did you learn jiu-jitsu?" And what was going on here was Elio had a genius-type mind, very analytical. He was able to take the original Japanese jiu-jitsu of Maeda. And Maeda was even though he was small, man, he was very athletic and very strong, very powerful little guy. Elio was weak, and he was able to take these positions, and by using leverage and positioning, he was able to adapt them to his smaller, weaker frame. But what was even more important was he was able to teach those techniques to other people. And that spawned the Gracie system of jiu-jitsu. It's all Brazilian jiu-jitsu. But what differentiates Gracie jiu-jitsu is the teaching style, the way it's taught to beginner students. It's a step-by-step way of teaching Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Plenty of guys that are good in jiu-jitsu. Plenty of guys that, without the last name Gracie, that are phenoms in Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Plenty of champs. But when it comes to the actual education, teaching style, Elio Gracie was an absolute genius. And all the people that have been trained under his tutelage, or under his son's tutelage, or his grandson's tutelage, they are the true inheritors of Gracie Jiu-Jitsu and that educational style. And it involves very much self-defense, self-preservation, rape escape, police and law enforcement. They actually have a special type of jiu-jitsu that they teach for police and military, for arresting violent people without hurting them. So it's a whole program. I was very fortunate to be affiliated directly with Elio and all his sons. And not so much his grandsons, they were little kids when I was taken, but even when those kids were like just young, they were amazing, really amazing. And I would love to go actually to Torrance and get a refresher course from those young boys that were just running around, little kids, when I was actually at the Gracie Academy. That's what really differentiates Gracie Jiu-Jitsu from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It's the way it's taught and the teaching style and the emphasis on street defense and keeping yourself safe.
And was that where you got interested in nutrition as well?
I'd always been interested in nutrition from the time I was a freshman in college. I had a lot of injuries in wrestling and a lot of pain, and I started experimenting with everything from vegetarianism to fasting to veganism to like everything, and was exploring nutritional ways to get myself out of pain. And I discovered some really interesting dietary systems. And then I had already known about food combining before I met the Gracies from a guy by the name of Herbert M. Sheldon, one of the pioneers in food combining. And their system was remarkably like Sheldon's. And it was invented by Carlos Gracie, who was a nutritionist and a naturopathic physician. And he treated people through diet and nutrition. And I was really amazed at how the diet was very, very similar. Some differences, but pretty similar. And I've studied Ayurvedic diet, the yogi diet, and everything in between. I've tried paleo. I tried an all-meat diet for a while. Yeah, like serious hardcore caveman style diet.
So what have you settled on now? What's an average
pretty much I followed this guy, Dr. John Tilden, who was also a food combiner. Right. He's along the lines of the Gracie diet. A lot of yogic principles in his diet. He's a turn-of-the-century physician from the early 30s in the United States. He was like a real ahead of his time guy. He already saw the dangers of the modern medical system. He was a certified doctor, but he already saw big pharmaceutical and big drugs coming in, and he already saw the real danger behind all of that and treating with drugs as opposed to treating with natural means, causing more harm than good. I myself haven't been to a doctor or physician in about 45 years. Not even once.
So how does it work? Because you've got separate meals, haven't you? You've got like starch meals and then...
Yeah, I just divide everything up. Basically a fruit-based meal, a starch-based meal, and a protein, vegetable-based meal. Starches and vegetables mix, protein and vegetables mix. Never mix starch and protein. Fruit and vegetables can mix to an extent, depending on... And you can mix a limited amount of dairy with fruit, depending on the type of fruit. Melons you should eat by itself. Avocados by itself. Milk by itself. So if you're going to drink milk, drink it, but drink it by itself.
Okay.
And if people would do that, you would see gluten sensitivity just completely disappear. It's because they're mixing gluten with everything. Sandwiches with meat sandwiches, they're
So there's no gluten in the diet at all then, by the time?
Yeah, I eat plenty of gluten. I just don't mix it with other things. That was my point. See, people get a sensitivity to gluten because they can't digest it. They can't digest it because of mixing it with all this other stuff. Okay. No wonder they get a sensitivity. Plus, they're eating it 3 meals a day. They're eating, rolls or toast at breakfast. They're having some type of sandwich at lunch. They're having dinner rolls or some kind of bread at evening meal. No wonder they develop all sorts of sensitivity. All a sensitivity means is your digestion is impaired.
Yeah.
A true allergy, you go into anaphylactic shock. So what people are calling allergies are not allergies.
Yeah.
What they're feeling are sensitivities. They're feeling sensitivity because they can't digest it. They can't digest it because their digestion is impaired from either overeating, mixing too many foods in one meal, or just eating something continuously too long, too often. You could probably get a sensitivity to anything if you drink enough of it all the time.
Are you familiar with the Dr. Weston Price study?
I am.
What would you incorporate fermented foods into your diet?
Pretty limited, but those are very powerful foods, and a lot of people don't realize that there's a lot of chemical compounds in those foods, which are chemical irritants. Right. Those foods aren't for everybody. You have to experiment carefully. Some of those things can cause some real problems, like pickled foods and stuff, and I do not get along. Just don't. I have like a completely different constitutional type that doesn't do well on that kind of thing.
So we've started eating a lot of kimchi as a result of that.
Listen, the best thing to do is you look at your diet. First, is it working? How do you know it's working? Well, are you fat? Is the pinch of skin on your cheekbone the same as the pinch of skin on your stomach? If this pinch of skin on your stomach is bigger than the cheekbone, you're fat. You got to get reduced diet. Your diet isn't working because you're fat. Second, do you have gas? Do you have abdominal pain? Do you have foul-smelling stools? Is the bathroom totally uninhabitable for 30 minutes after you leave? You got some serious fermentation and or putrefaction going on in your gut. Do you move your bowels a couple times a day? If you don't, your diet's not working. Your bowels should move each time you eat. So if you eat 3 meals, you should move 3 meals. If you're having all sorts of foul gases and so forth, no good. Your diet's not working. Do you have skin rashes? Do you have pimples? Do you have like irritations on the skin? Obviously, your body is trying to get rid of toxins through vicarious elimination through the skin, meaning that your diet's not working. Do you have low energy? Do you need naps? Do you have trouble waking up in the morning? Are you all wide awake and all wired up at night? Something about your diet's not working, because you should go to sleep and relax and be able to sleep instantly, and you should be able to wake up feeling spry and energetic. Do you have aches and pains? Do you have arthritic feelings in your body? Do you have all sorts of congestion in your sinuses and your nasal passages? Do you breathe well? Do you have like a coated tongue and mucus? If you do, your diet's not working. That's how you tell. So if you can answer those questions, say, no, it's fine. Well, hey, go for it, man.
Yeah.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah, okay.
And do you have any thoughts on the whole high-fat thing? And people kind of trying to boost their testosterone and hormones through having a high-fat diet?
The best way to boost your natural hormones is just through high-intensity exercise.
Yeah.
Diet can help a bit. There's certainly not any reason to be afraid of fat, but there's certainly no reason to eat an excessive amount of fat. I certainly don't avoid butter. I don't avoid, and when I eat meat, I'll eat the fat off of it. I don't go out of my way to avoid it, but I don't go out of my way to eat a lot of it. And I don't think you definitely don't need to supplement fats.
No.
You get plenty of that.
And probably this might be the last question, because I know we're running out of time.
Yeah, we're running out of time, guys.
But obviously, jiu-jitsu is quite strenuous for the joints. Is there anything, any supplements that you recommend specifically for joints? Thinking things like fish oil, krill oil. Have you got any?
None of it's ever really proven to be very effective. The most effective balm for the joint is exercise. Exercise is always your best medicine. If you are doing your mobility drills and your joint work and so forth, you'll be as pain-free as you can. But just realize you cannot do a sport like jiu-jitsu and not suffer somewhat. It's the price you pay, with great power comes with great responsibility. And part of that responsibility is just realizing that you're going to have aches and strains and muscle pulls and so forth. Because, hey, man, it's combat. Yeah. You don't fight with another man and try to submit each other and throw each other around and choke each other and lock each other's joints and twist each other in pretzels. You don't do that without people getting hurt. It's part of the game, man. So as long as you're not a crybaby about that and you're willing to say, hey, this is what I signed on for, cool. You can minimize it by wrestling smart and doing your mobility drills, but don't expect to be injury-free. It's just not going to happen. With exercise, general exercise for health and well-being, yes, you should never be injured. With your supplementary weight training program, or if you're lifting kettlebells and hurting yourself, then you're an idiot. You don't know what you're doing. But with jiu-jitsu, you can't help it. Because even if you're not an idiot, you don't know about the other guy you're wrestling with, you always have that second party in there. So you can't always account for what he's going to do. But in spite of that, I've been pretty lucky. I've had pretty minor injuries. I had way more injuries in college wrestling, NCAA wrestling, than I ever did in jiu-jitsu. Much more user-friendly. I definitely had my share of injuries, but wrestling was much worse. So.
I definitely had more from football as well.
Yeah, so you know what I mean.
Soccer, obviously. Yeah. Well, thanks, Steve.
Hey, well, thank you, man. Thanks for having me on the show, and I hope your podcast works out really well. And thanks for all those people out there listening. I appreciate it a lot. Hope to see you around at Steve Maxwell seminar one of these days.
I was going to say, for people listening who want to know more about mobility or more about what you're doing, future seminars, where can they find out more about you?
Just go to my site, www.maxwellsc.com. It's Maxwell SC, as in strength and conditioning.com. I'm also on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I answer all my tweets. I try to answer any contacts on my website. So, go to my events page, look where I'm traveling to, and so forth. And maybe I'll see you around.
Excellent. I would recommend Steve's website. There's some excellent articles on there and videos, and there's some helpful tips for training. So
yeah, I'd recommend a mobility seminar. Thought I knew how to breathe, thought I knew how to squat, thought I knew how to deadlift. Turns out I didn't. So yeah, recommend it.
It's been excellent.
All right.
Okay, thanks, Steve.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening, guys. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Could have gone on twice as long as it wasn't for getting thrown out of the sports hall by the karate guys. What made it worse was we were standing outside the room talking to Steve, and I could see through the window just loads of grown men walking up and down the hall, punching the air, shouting. I just thought if they'd have came in and sat quietly and just listened to what Steve was saying, they'd probably have actually learnt a lot more about functional martial arts and functional training in the whole karate session. But it was a good day, wasn't it, Ben?
Yeah, awesome for sure.
I think it was 7 hours of mobility training, which seemed like it might drag when initially I was thinking, I want to go to this, I want to train with Steve, I want to meet him, I want to get him on the podcast, but 7 hours of mobility. But it actually was really interesting, went quite fast, didn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Loads of different stuff kind of covered within it. There was like breath training, including hypoxic training methods, relaxation, active relaxation techniques, sort of ancient techniques like the full massages, then mobility and flexibility, and then strengthening muscular endurance exercises. So loads of good material in there.
Yeah, are you using any of it? Anything that you got from the seminar?
Yeah, the only bit that, the main idea that I took away from it was how the human body moves through squat, hip hinge, push and pull. With push and pull being fairly simple upper body motor skills, and the hip hinge being quite difficult, especially for myself. I thought I was doing it right, and I was doing more of almost like a squat come hip hinge. So yeah, it was good to get the finer points of that sorted out. And Steve gave us this exercise where, you can have a look at dowel rod deadlift on YouTube, and you take a dowel rod or a broom handle and you hold it along your back so that there's a point of contact just sort of above and between the glutes and the lower back, and then touching sort of between the shoulder blades and then the back of the head. So the back's constantly got those points of contact. And then you do a hip hinge where your knees don't come over the feet. They just stay, completely upright. And I've just been doing a lot of those really slow. So you're working on mobility, you're increasing that range of movement through the hip hinge, and you're also basically doing like a slow twitch sort of muscular endurance version of the deadlift. So yeah, I've been using that a lot, feeling a lot stronger. I'm sure it's helping my stability and form when I'm running.
With the squats, one of the interesting things, like I didn't realise that I never activated my glutes doing the squats, and then when Steve was talking about screwing your feet into the ground while you do it, and actually activating your glutes, and I've started doing that and noticed a big difference from that as well. It's amazing with Steve. He reminded me of one of those, in America where you get those preacher guys and they get someone up and they cure them somehow, just like Jesus comes and cures. But when he did that with the guy who couldn't squat at all, he couldn't even squat down, and within like, I don't know, what was it, a minute, Steve had him squatting really well.
Yeah, people were crying and stuff. Basically, it was interesting though. He got that guy to lie down and pulled on the tops of his feet. I don't know if people can imagine via audio, and then pulled him through like a squat range of motion, and then stood him up again to do the squat, and then he was able to do it because it's interesting. Like obviously, Steve used to train with Pavel Tsatsouline and those guys at Dragon's Door, and Pavel Tsatsouline has a famous line that he used where he said that strength is a skill and skill is a strength. And anyone who's familiar with like grease and the groove type protocols, where you train a certain movement not to failure, but just to re-enhance the skill, the neurological connection and perception of completing that movement. That's what Steve was doing there. He was just allowing his brain to understand the range of motion that he needs to go through, and then he was putting him in the more stressful position of the squat, and then just having him drop in and out of that position. So yeah, it was awesome to see that theory applied.
The breath thing was interesting as well, where he's kind of just like, you just sort of sit the breath. A lot of people breathe too deeply. I thought that was quite an interesting concept.
Yeah, I've got to admit, I don't have a consistent meditation practice at the moment, but I did. And when I did it, I think one of the reasons I didn't have as much success with it as I'd like to is because I was really almost like too perfectionistically focused on trying to have that breath in and then the breath out, lasting longer than the breath in. I was almost like, gritting my teeth and like focus too much. And Steve's all about that, isn't he? It's like even when he's doing chin-ups and stuff like that, and squats and things, he's like, relax your face, don't grimace because it releases cortisol. It's like, just relax, smaller breaths, sip oxygen. Yeah, it's good, it's solid.
I'm still using these 10 archetypal human postures, which are sort of the alternatives to sit in. Like now, while we're talking, I'm sitting on a mat on the floor, and the laptop is on the sofa, whereas obviously most people would have that the opposite way around. But yeah, I've noticed a big difference, especially that one that Steve recommends when you're actually on a laptop, is where you sort of lie on your stomach. He calls it like a kid playing video games, and you're typing. So it's kind of like a cobra stretch in yoga.
Yeah.
Whether that's the name in yoga, I'm not too sure. It's probably got a really complicated Indian name actually for that position. But that's really good because you're actually increasing the flexibility of your back while you're on Facebook or whatever, instead of actually shortening your hip flexors, which is what 99% of the population are doing.
Yeah, man. I mean, if you look at guys like Ben Greenfield, and he's always talking about how rather than sitting in static posture all day and then beating up your body through intense training for an hour or two a night, it's a much healthier and much more time effective approach to be living in this more sort of without being cliche by using the word Paleolithic, but more of like a Paleolithic manner where you're squatting, like you'd be squatting around a campfire and stuff, you're in these different weird positions because they didn't have chairs and things, and you're moving around at a low intensity rather than sitting static in a chair, and then doing easier workouts in night because science has shown that if you sit all day for like 8 hours and then you go out and train at night, you've still got a massive reduction in your longevity. And Steve's protocols and ideas definitely dovetail really well with that.
Yeah, I'd love to actually go to one of his jiu-jitsu seminars, but unfortunately I was in IB for when he was teaching that. But if he's over again, it'd be quite interesting to learn some of the old school Gracie self-defense style. It's really interesting to hear his old Gracie in action challenge stories as well.
Yeah.
It's so weird to imagine that was only kind of 10, 11 years ago when that sort of thing was going on.
Yeah.
And
I bet Steve is super strong as well. You can imagine when that guy gets a hold of you. Damn.
And he's a fifth dan now, isn't he? So it's going to be that really awful combination of strong and really technical. But
yeah, it's true.
I just can't imagine it nowadays. Just someone coming in and just challenging the instructor in the middle of a session, and them getting one of his students out and like, you've got to fight this guy, no rules. And it's like something from a film, isn't it? I could listen to those stories all day, but unfortunately, unfortunately we didn't have time. But I'd definitely like to get him on again if he's around.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Everyone has to kind of go through that process, don't they, as well? I think that he says on the podcast that he's, he's like somewhat nervous about the first ones, like the first fights, and you hear about like Tyson was thinking about getting on a train and just running away from his first fight and stuff. It's good, man. It's that feel the fear and do it anyway kind of mentality. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's excellent. Thanks again to Steve Maxwell, and thanks to Ben. If you enjoyed what you heard today and you want to know more about the show, go over to our website at www.eatsleepgrowrepeat.com. From there you can listen to any of the previous episodes, and there's also a blog section with some interesting articles. Also, that you'll find the links to Twitter and Facebook there, so why not follow us and then you won't miss any future episodes. Well, after listening to that, you might feel like going and working out, and if you do, I'm going to help you by playing you my pre-workout track. It's the Mika remix of Rewind by Emma Hewitt. So enjoy that one, and we'll be speaking to you again soon.